This is the test of the live captioning. Rob and Laura, we're ready to go.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Almost evening. Welcome to the very last session of the HUD's CARES Act Virtual Training Conference 2022. You made it, and so did we. This session will discuss monitoring CDBG subrecipients. Thank you again so much for joining us and taking time away from your daily schedule and participating all this week through polls and questions, and we hope you have found this conference helpful. My name is Rob Strantz. I'm with the Cloudburst Group, and today I'm joined by my colleague and coworker, Laura Dietert. Hello, Laura.
Hello, happy Friday.
Yes, and behind the scenes is our host and support staff from the CDM Group. Thank you so much. Before I start, we'll review a few things which you are probably familiar with. This webinar is scheduled for 1 hour, and we were looking through the slides. We'll get pretty darn close. So we hope to have some time for questions, but we'll maybe go right up to the hour. If anytime you need to step away, remember this is recorded. The recording is going to be available on the HUD Exchange in a couple weeks. And all participants are in listen-only mode now and for the duration of the session. Note that there is live captioning available using the Show Captions button under the video player. If you need more information, there's an attendee guide, which you should have received. Questions. So as I mentioned, we will have time. We hope to have time at the end of the hour to answer questions. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the webpage to enter those questions. Feel free to enter them as you have them. We'll collect them and respond later. If we're not able to get to your question today, or if you have a more specific question, there is an Ask a Question available for CDBG CV grantees. Please make use of it. If you are having technical difficulties, please use the chat feature to request help from the host. They'll be keeping an eye on it and jump in to help you. You can also email eventsupport@cdmgroup.com. Please don't use the chat for questions. The presenters we'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A. And if you haven't taken advantage of it, you can now open a separate browser window or install the Slido app on your mobile device and use the code, which is, what's the code for today's session? 720836 is the code for this session. All right, getting into the thick of it here. What is monitoring? Well, monitoring is not an audit. It's not a gotcha. It's a process, and the goal of that is to improve program performance. It will provide you, the grantee, with some critical information you need to manage your program effectively and efficiently. Yes, it is true that sometimes it can identify fraud, waste, and abuse. But really, that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is compliance and a well-run program. To continue on this theme of monitoring, it will tell you as the grantee how well your program is managed, how your internal and external controls are working. And because this session we are focusing on subrecipient monitoring by grantees, we want to remind you that you, the grantee, are responsible for how your programs are administered, including how subrecipients administer their parts of your programs. Subrecipients and even other units of general local government or other departments within your organization often need a little monitoring. Before I hand the presentation over to Laura, I would like to point out the recently updated guidebooks, Managing CDBG and Playing by the Rules. If you have been around CDBG as long as I have, you will remember these dog-eared guides living in a 3-ring binder within arm's reach. They have now been refreshed, much needed facelift or refreshing of them. Note that you'll know them by their new covers. There are some old URLs floating around in search results, but you'll know you found the new ones by going to the HUD Exchange landing page or finding the PDF with these lovely new covers. And now I'll turn it over to Laura for a bit.
Yeah, I think Playing by the Rules just came out December. So if you haven't seen it for a while, it's finally updated. There we go. So in general with CDBG, right, you're doing several things when you're monitoring. So it makes it a really important part of your entire program to have the monitoring thought out and pre-planned, right? So you have the program performance that you're looking at for all of your subgrantees that are carrying out your activities, right? And the grantees are the responsible ones for all the day-to-day operations, right, of the CDBG program. And again, that you are the ones that have to ensure that the CDBG funds are used to meet all of the regulations that you need. Sadly, we cannot pass that on via contract or anything else if those regulations are broken. So it's up to you to look through and make sure that you're setting it up correctly. And again, monitoring is a tool that you can use really throughout the year to be looking at compliance by your subrecipients. And so you're looking at both the program overall and then specific project or activity performance. I think we're gonna skip this one right now. Is that correct? I'm not seeing ideas, so.
Yeah, we'll fly right through. No, I've got a lot of slides.
Right. We want to get to your questions. All right. So there's 3 types of monitoring that you can think of. There's your administrative and financial monitoring, right? So this is the highest level organizational monitoring that you'll be doing. So you're looking at subrecipients and looking to make sure that they're managing the program correctly, using funding, all of their record keeping methods, their finances, and specifically the 2 CFR 200, which is the uniform guidance that replaced some of the A circulars, 87, I think 133. And so you're looking right at how the organization works internally with all of the funding. For the program, you're looking specifically 1 level down, and you're looking to see with the program that they've been tasked and contracted, are they using effective and efficient regulatory operations? Are they in compliance with all of the CDBG regulations that need to be followed? And specifically for the program type that you're looking at, right? Whether it's housing rehab, public services, right? There's some different operations and management that you would expect and be looking for, especially with efficient regulatory operations. And project monitoring, right? You're getting down to the activity level and making sure that all the regulations have been followed at that specific level for the activities that are either being carried out or had been carried out. CDBG says that the recipients have to be monitored. So this is one of your responsibilities. And it's codified at 24 CFR 570.501B, also called the monitoring clause. So how frequently you monitor is based on your evaluation of risk. And then this is called the risk assessment, which is a new requirement really to go through and look at, right, what are the organizations where you really need to get to them before anybody else with limited time and resources for monitoring by your organization. Right? And so you're looking at all of your subgrantees and looking at them for the type and complexity of the activity they're carrying out, and then the experience and capacity of the subrecipient to carry it out. Right? So what is their grant management experience, and how have they performed in the past? So for the risk assessment, it's the new 2 CFR 200.332B. This is a section to look up. And it's the requirement that pass-through entities, which is you, if you're a grantee, have to have a risk assessment and risk assessment procedures for your subrecipients. And specifically, you're looking at the following factors, which are their prior experience, right? And specifically with federal funding and ideally specific CDBG experience. What have there been their previous audits, pardon me, including whether the same or similar subawards have been audited as a major program, whether they have any new personnel or new or substantially changed systems. Right, you may want to have another look with the one long time administrative person for a program is gone and it's a new person, right? The experience of the whole organization may be a factor in there that will help, but a new person would be something to look out for in terms of the risk. Right? And then of course, if they have any federal awarding agency monitoring, right? So if they have additional USDA or education, other funds that come in, and if another federal agency has been looking for similar things, how have they done there? Because that is, of course, a telltale sign of, especially for things like finance, how are they doing? There is some question right now as to whether this requirement for the risk assessment requires this to be done annually. There is a bulletin put out in 2016 by OIG, the Inspector General, and this is called Subrecipient Oversight and Monitoring. It does kind of imply that it's annually, but HUD wants you to know that it's not stated in the uniform guidance. Right? So that said, you still want to be able to look up the subrecipient monitoring management section of this entire risk assessment section to make sure that you are, I guess, aware of the requirements and are able to make your own risk assessment policies and procedures for monitoring subrecipients. So when you have your strategy and plan put together for your policies and procedures in general, you're looking to think at the very beginning, what are your objectives of the monitoring plan? And what are the procedures for reporting by the subrecipients to you? Because obviously people are going to follow the rules when they know the rules a little bit better. What are your procedures for review and monitoring, both on a small scale, day to day or the week before, as well as looking at a schedule for when you're going to be reviewed and monitoring, and also be thinking about which members of your staff participate in this, what are their roles, so that as a procedure goes smoothly every time and everybody knows what to do. Again, you have to have your risk assessment and thinking about it beforehand. How are you going to set up your system for risk and address risk for the ones that you do determine are either high or low risk? When you're doing monitoring, what do you do beforehand? Specifically looking at contacting subgrantees, reports, making sure that your staff know to go through and find, say, the subrecipient agreement. Right, all of the things that when we're busy, we can forget. So you want to make sure that you have that figured out beforehand. Right, as well as a good monitoring checklist, because this is something that's both your documentation, but also your own tool, just to remember all of the details and to make sure that you are thinking of the right things to be looking for with your subgrantees. And finally, you have monitoring letters ready to go. So you aren't finding yourself at 4 o'clock on a Friday needing to draft it fresh. You need to know what you're going to be saying to your subgrantees. And there's 5 basic monitoring steps. So once you've set your strategy up, you're going to have your pre-monitoring preparation before you go. You'll conduct the monitoring. You'll communicate the results back to the subrecipient. And then at some point you'll follow up afterwards. And that may be, again, a process of communication and follow-up as you go. So your preparation for monitoring beforehand should include, but isn't limited to, these things. You're going to have subrecipient documentation and records to look at, and you want to make sure that you look at the application that the subrecipient gave to you at the beginning before they were funded, the actual subrecipient agreement, which is one of the most important ones, again, that you could possibly look at, any financial statements and records, their audits, progress reports. So that could be for the program, some of your financial reports. Financially, what have been their drawdown requests for invoices, and how have they been documenting their payments so that you can do your draws in IDIS. There's specific IDIS reports that you'll want to use beforehand, and I think that's an underutilized resource out in the world, is some of the IDIS reports for monitoring. And then, of course, previous monitoring reports and correspondence, which also sometimes are not used as much as they should be, especially if there's any staff turnover, things like that. Because unless there's a true finding, things where it required action, sometimes those notes beforehand can still be very useful for seeing trends and how granting or subgranting may be doing. And again, the monitoring checklist is, besides, I think the subrecipient agreement, one of your most important tools that you can have when you're out monitoring, because it can be specific to your policies and procedures, and it's a reminder for yourself as you go through. So you want to use, for CV, there's going to be a specific monitoring exhibit put out at some point, but for the moment, you can develop one based on the existing CDBG monitoring exhibits, as long as you just remember to add in the duplication of benefits and the coronavirus tieback questions into any existing CDBG monitoring checklists. And I just mentioned IDIS reports, underused. A few of the reports, if you're not running them already, that can be very nice to run before any kind of monitoring for a subrecipient, would be the PRO2, which is the activity detail report for CDBG. And that's going to show you a lot of your details that are at the project level. And so you're looking at things kind of on the basis of an annual action plan and seeing your activities in that context. There's also the PR03, which is the activity summary report. There's actually a few kinds of PR03 that you may run that are more financial, like BOSMAC or some of the others, but the activity summary report is very detailed for accomplishments and the activity level information that's been entered. PR05 is your drawdown report that's grouped by the project and then the activity. Right. This one, by the way, is not a very good financial monitoring tool, especially for reports at the end of the year, but this is a useful tool when you're actually looking to see in any given annual action plan program year, right, what activities have had drawdowns, which ones are sitting and maybe haven't drawn down anything. And so that can be one of your indicators, as well as if you do let sub-recipients keep program income, or if they're reverting it back to you, what program income have they sent back to you? Because in your fiscal monitoring, right, you'll be looking at these records and making sure that they line up. Okay, Rob.
All right, thank you, Laura. So we understand the requirement, we've got a plan, and we're prepared to monitor. The next step in monitoring is the entrance conference. And this is the point at where you set the tone and expectations for the monitoring. You know, we mentioned monitoring as sort of this ongoing process, but there's this more focused monitoring, more specifically a monitoring, I guess we call it a monitoring event. This is most often on site, but doesn't necessarily need to be so, meaning this meeting. So you're setting the purpose of your, let's call it the visit, your monitoring visit, the goals. Remember, it's not about digging up dirt. And also the process from this entrance conference to the closeout, the resolution of monitoring. So you want to make sure you have all key management personnel attend. This should include, at a minimum, the executive director and the day-to-day program lead. It's also very helpful to have the controller or CFO attend. You really need anybody there who's going to be your point of contact to get the information you need and to connect to who you may need to speak to answer your questions, and also to be able to direct staff, other staff, to respond to you, because who are you, right? So you need to make sure you make that connection. And also anybody who's going to need to know that this is happening in the organization. And we're moving on to conducting the monitoring. Okay, so we only have this hour with you. We're actually making pretty good time. So this is a bit high level, this slide here. We do want to just really stress the approach of this, the evaluation, communication, documentation, and this cycle, this process. As I mentioned before, monitoring is both a general process and this more focused, specific, sometimes annual event. But sort of back to the process as it relates to the more focused monitoring event. So you're going to want to conduct interviews. You want to talk to people. You want to find out what's going on in person or otherwise. This really provides an important context to what to inform your monitoring. So you really start to understand what people do. And also, I like to say it sort of triangulates your vision of the program. So you're getting these written reports, but you're also hearing from the people who are doing this work. So you get a more round out your knowledge of the program and how it's administered. You can learn a whole lot by talking to the people who are doing this day to day. If you can, talk to some of the beneficiaries, the people who've actually benefited from the program, and board members. Remember, a lot of these are nonprofits, so they've got boards that involve, board members. You're going to want to do file reviews. So looking at the source documentation, this is very important when it comes to documenting eligibility. And also you'll be getting reports, but how is that information collected? You want to see that physical source record to understand. Often that's really revealing about where there may be some weaknesses. So you can really see this whole process and the documentation of how the subrecipient is implementing the program. And also, this is not just about files and staff, but really getting a sense of the operation. My favorite thing, and I think it's also subrecipient's favorite thing, is to give you the grand tour. If it's a facility, to see a facility, to get walked around, to meet everybody, to put faces to names. It's not in the slide, but monitoring to me is really about making the connection. It's about building the relationship. It's about creating trust and really building that partnership. I'm sure many out there in these last 2 years, that has been difficult to maintain. And I think a big part of that is that, the monitoring is a chance where you get to go out there and see where it happens. I think for you as grantees, it's a fabulous way to get grounded in what's going on and see the impact of these programs that we help to fund day to day. Okay, so sampling. You're not going to be able to look at every file or every document. There in the HUD monitoring handbook and the guides, there's some really good information on sampling. And sometimes you will get 100% documentation on something like intake forms, or at least get them sent to you so you can look at them if you want to. But sometimes there's just too many. So you don't have to look at every single thing, but you can sort of dip in. Auditors are really good at this. This is not auditing, but they'll say, "Give me that one, give me that one, give me that one," or they have some ways of picking.
You're not letting them pick out
right.
which files you see?
Right. No.
Okay.
We're not letting them cherry pick. And also remember, you want to be looking at like case files, board minutes, procurement records, timesheets, and all those things you can dip in and sample and say like when you want to look at them, what you want to look at. And one note, looking at files around confidentiality, because some of these, like especially if you're funding like counseling services or anything involving case management, there's a level of if not legal confidentiality, definitely ethical confidentiality, and that's fine. Make it clear that those materials should be sectioned off in the file, like placed under a big red sheet or something, or put it in an envelope. I've even seen where they put them in an envelope and keep in the file. So if they don't want to take them out of the file, that's good because they're following good rules of file integrity, but you don't want to see them because that may be confidential materials. So, okay, so skipping through this whole process to the exit conference. So we've gone through, and now we're sitting at the end of the process here. So and we apologize for sort of skipping over the heart of that process. Really take some time with those guidebooks we mentioned, the managing CDBG and playing by the rules. They have been updated, but even the old ones had some really good fundamentals of monitoring.
I'll add that that's where you follow your entire monitoring checkbook or checklist you have, because
great
once you're starting to look around at frolicking children benefiting from the program, it can be easy to get distracted and just forget all the details that you need to remember.
That's right.
So that's what happens in between.
Absolutely.
That and
so we're all here at the final step of this sort of monitoring event. Well, not the final step, but one of the important steps. So you visited, you've gone and visited or done your virtual visit, and you're ready to sit down and discuss what you've seen. And so the people you want there is really the same as the entrance conference, maybe plus or minus some of those who you did or did not actually work with through the process. And at this conference is what we call an exit conference. So this is not the end of the monitoring cycle here. But it's the point where you sit down and you say, okay, here's what I've seen. Here's my initial observations. I have some questions. I have some concerns that came up or that were communicated during this process. And you really want to, put these out there. Say, I have these things, these sort of open-ended things. I need this information. I asked for this. So and so said they'd get it back to me. And especially if there's something that's a real red flag or a real, we'll get into this in a couple more slides, but that's a real issue. You want to raise it at the exit conference. You do not want to blindside your subrecipient either in or after the exit conference. There should be no surprises. You need to be really crystal clear about, what if something came up, you need to raise it. You need to let them know. Often through the exit conference, you can actually resolve some things. So you can say, oh, where was this? And you say, oh, I'll be right back. And boom, they'll bring it in the room. You also may have a to-do list. You'll definitely have a to-do list that comes out of this conference, exit conference. So it should be, okay, sort of everybody, has their instructions after this. Okay. So concluding the monitoring and following up. So every monitoring is going to have its own unique result, but we can kind of group them into sort of rough categories, sort of each having different sort of paths to conclusion. You're going to have rockstar subrecipient. Okay, pass the Shannon payment, everybody. Great job. And then you're going to have okay, keep up, keep up the good work. You've done some great things. Keep up the good work. You're going to have there are a few things that need to work on improving. Let's figure out how we can do things a little bit better, strengthen you, support you better. There's going to be, we have some areas where you need some support. So there's some technical assistance that very clearly, I've got some weaknesses. I'm using that lay term, weaknesses that you need to shore up. Or there's going to be, Houston, we have a problem. And I don't mean that if you're from Houston, that's not personal. But that, yeah, there's some serious concerns here that we need to address. And they can also be mixed, sort of depending on the area of focus or the process or requirement. So they could be a rock star in eligibility, but a complete nightmare on procurement. They can be absolutely fabulous on accounting, but their governance is just chaos. But they'll be the kind of like, this sort of Likert scale of 1 to 5. And so where you're going to have concerns or findings, I stress you need to document in the writing. And also there may be a process before you sort of do that final letter where there's some inquiries, there's some questions that you're trying to, because the goal is you want to be able to tie this all up. If you've got unanswered questions, you want answers to them. You want some level of certainty that you understand what's going on, not I just couldn't find out. We don't have a slide about this, but I want to talk about findings versus concerns. We hear finding. Now, finding is a high threshold. I consider a high threshold. A finding is where there's a deficiency that shows that there's been a failure to comply with statutory, regulatory, or other program requirements. And if you're issuing a finding, you need to be able to point to that statute, that regulation, or other program requirement. Whether it's CFR, it's in the 570s, or it's in 2 CFR 200s, or Part 58. But you need to be able to point to it. And it's material and it's substantial. So almost everything else is going to fall into a concern. So there's something that's a deficiency, a weakness that has maybe the potential to lead to a finding, or otherwise really speaks to deficiencies or weaknesses that are not necessarily related to statute, regulation, or requirements. So it's something that you can't point to the rule, or something that hasn't broken the rule yet, but may. And also, Laura had mentioned looking at other sources. So don't confuse like a finding in their annual audit with a CDBG program finding. It may indicate a level of concern, but it's not necessarily a finding, by CDBG. Okay. So corrective actions. So we're going to talk 2 slides here about sorts of corrective actions you might take. We'll kind of start out at low level and work our way up. Most of the time, you're going to be at this lower level. And often, sometimes you're not even going to get there because it's a matter of filling in the blanks. So you'll be able to, fill in the blanks and, question answered. Something you're going to want to note that you had this question, it was answered. And at this level, you're going to be the sort of actions that you're going to take are, hey, we need to do some training, technical assistance. You need to beef up a policy or a process. Like I've seen this a lot on, they've got the sort of the state, the basic state and federal equal opportunity requirements, but not the HUD level FHEO equal opportunity and access to programs. That's really common. They'll have the employment stuff, but not the equal access to programs that are funded. So something like that. You just need to patch up a policy. Like maybe you need to keep them on a shorter leash, keep a closer tabs on them. Maybe you need to come back in 60, 90 days to see how they're doing. So this is generally going to be at the concern level, although it could be a finding. But if something's a finding and you can kind of, if it's a matter of missing information and you get that information and it's like, oh, this isn't, it's not, you haven't, we get the information and it turns out you really haven't broken the rule. You just needed to provide more information. Don't spill the ink on a finding. Let it get resolved and note it as a concern. So then, okay, so next level. So this is at the point where you have some serious finding or findings that have not been resolved or still open and or findings that are incurable, meaning like they didn't bid the work, but the work's done. They clearly assisted people who are not income eligible. That's a situation where, we can't really explain this away. It's not something that you can necessarily fix. Or you've got a situation where you're getting stonewalled. So these are situations where you may do things like withhold payment, even recaptured funds if already dispersed, if it was for an ineligible use very clearly, or something where there was some more serious non-compliance. You may take sort of action such as placing them on a probation. Okay, you did it once, but you do it again, and you're in big trouble. And then we get to these highest level interventions, and really, I don't know if I've ever really gotten here, and you really don't want to get here. You should have some guardrails in place, some processes, some procedures, this overall keeping an eye on things so that you're not getting here. And this generally, when you're getting to this kind of level, you're not talking about, nonfeasance. You're talking about malfeasance. You're talking about fraud, bad actors. And this is a case where you're going to do things like terminate an agreement. You may suspend or ban someone from future awards, or you may even refer them to legal action or exclusion, meaning debarment. So this is something that they're here, but you don't necessarily ever want to get here. And if you're ever here, you need to be having a conversation with your field office. So things really at this high level, definitely this needs to be something that your field office is aware of and working with you about.
I would think of this situation too when you're making your risk assessment policies and procedures, because this is what you want to be finding right away before it ever can become this kind of issue. Right. So if it's a brand new grantee and you don't check them for 2 years, this kind of thing can happen. But if you check right away, especially if they're brand new, you may not get to this level.
Yep.
Hopefully.
Okay. So let's talk about technical assistance. And I'm looking at the time. We'll have time for questions, so that'll be great. I guess I talk faster than I write. So technical assistance. So this is a response to monitoring, but not just a response to monitoring. You may be identifying the need for technical assistance. Like Laura said, brand new, never done CDBG. You need to be standing there right alongside them every step of the way. And also in general, technical assistance is really, well, supporting and building the capacity to subrecipients is important, and monitoring is going to help reveal where they need your support. Remember, subrecipients are you leveraging the resources in your community, the people resources in your community, the organizational resources in your community to do things that you can't do yourself. You know, it's making use of the CDBG and the 20% admin that pays your salary to you know, really leverage the impact of these programs. So building their capacity is really, I'm getting a bit off on a tangent, but building their capacity is so important. And monitoring is one of the ways that you figure out where they might need help. And as I mentioned before, it's really part of building a relationship with them and extending your program.
And I would think most organizations, you know, if they even have a finding and the result is it's a finding, but we'll come through and teach you so you don't do this again, is going to be a lot more welcome than just telling them don't do this again.
Right.
Not
Absolutely. So I don't see that we have any questions. So maybe we'll go through this slide. And Laura, I'm going to ask you to read this off because I don't have it full screen and
it's tiny. All right. So we're looking through the following scenario, and we'd like your thoughts on this. So if you have a city senior center that has long been recognized as a vital social service and recreational resource in the community, Fred Funhouse, real name, the city community development director, has not visited the CSC for a monitoring visit in several years. The new CSC executive director, Tammy Toogood, has been described in the local media as a go-getter who looks under every rock for ways to support additional activities at the center. Becoming aware of the Part 200 risk assessment at a HUD training 2 months ago, Fred decides to make what he believes will be a routine monitoring visit to the CSC. The most recent CDBG grant was for a new roof for the building. CDBG funds paid for 50% of the roof, and the rest came from local funding. Fred did not visit CSC during the roof replacement, as the city engineer assured him that he had everything under control. As he approached the CSC on this occasion, he noticed a big banner that hung from the building announcing the local high school senior prom later that evening. Entering the building, he saw that much of the space is being used for a children's daycare center. A small room in the back of the building is where the activities for the senior citizens are held. Mrs. Toogood acknowledges that they had to shift from some of the other activities that generated more revenue, help keep the lights on. Senior activities are now only scheduled on weekends, which Fred verifies by looking at the monthly calendar of activities posted to Mrs. Toogood's office door. So for the first question, we have, I believe, a poll open, and it's just an open answer poll. And we want to know, what is the problem or issue for monitoring? So not in the grand scheme of things, right? But what is the problem in this situation?
All right, we've got the question up on the screen here.
Okay.
So if you have thoughts on what's the problem here, what's the concern here? Is it? Oh, there we go. Okay, good. There we go.
Hey.
Oh, yes. Has not visited the CSC in a while. That is a problem. And again, these are just help you think. There's no right answer. But one right answer.
Yes. There are many ways also of thinking about where problems start. So I think there's some good ones here. I really like change in use and eligibility. Whoever just answered that, right? We have multi-use of the building, change of use, right? And so I think that's getting to really the crux of the issue. I like whoever said that the funds paid for the roof for a presumed benefit class, but now it's used for something else, which is the A+ answer, right? Because they're probably, if there was presumed benefit, they weren't getting the same information necessarily from the
Correct.
subrecipients if they set it up as low to moderate clientele. Yeah, and it's ineligible activity. Yep.
There we go.
I mean, or it is certainly because they don't have a subrecipient agreement letting them know that they can do this.
Yep.
Yeah, and the fact that Fred, what's his last name? Funhouse, that's right, of the Austin Funhouses. He has not visited in a long time. He took the engineer. He took that information. So what did Fred do correctly? So let's give him the benefit of the doubt here and say, what, we know something went wrong, but what did he do correctly here? And hopefully you can all go back and read it.
Yes, open book quiz.
It is better. Everybody has another tab open looking for giant monitors at this point. All right.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Oh yeah, the questions are coming up on the Zoom a little bit after.
So we're getting a little delay. That's good. So some of the answers that I see, yeah, I mean, he did eventually go and visit the building and do a monitoring, right? He did inspect the building.
Right, and he had up, here's, I don't know if we see it yet, but he looked at the calendar. He saw what was going on. He noticed that something wasn't quite right, and that's the importance of that being, showing up where it's happening, going to the facility, talking to people, seeing what's going on. That's
yeah, and for
very
the
important.
grantee's perspective, he documented for sure in several ways what the problem is, so that it's not ambiguous. If it is a finding, this one probably, this one's going to be a finding, but he'll have very specific documentation to show what is the issue. Ooh, and I like that he conducted a site visit after learning the Part 200 reg. Yes, he went to that training to help him remember that he has to go check for these things. Okay.
Okay.
And so incorrectly on Fred's part, where did this guy go wrong in many ways?
We gave him the pluses now, the minuses. So think about risk and risk management.
Yeah, and we want to know, right, what did he do wrong? I love these kind of questions because there's so many ways that you can think about this. Yeah, discovered the issue too late is a good one, right? Just because we know this is how much later? Was it 2 years? But he blindly trusted the city
Right.
engineer. Yep.
And the city engineer was doing the city engineer's job, right? She was doing her job, but
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
they're looking at permitting,
but
but they're not also your CDBG
mhm,
liaison.
they don't have those eyes.
Yep. And discovered the issue too late. Yeah, I think is a big one, because no matter what, right, if you're looking at risk assessment, this one should be higher up with the new executive director. One person had the question that there are too many programs being handled under one, and I'm taking this like two ways. You know, is the grantee managing too many problems or programs that he's not getting to this, or is this CSC organization managing multiple other programs so they can't do their job well?
Right. And
Ooh,
perhaps there was
somebody,
a level of blind trust in the executive director of the
and
organization. Somebody was otherwise very capable and ran a really great organization, but in looking at first-time applicants, maybe this is the first time subrecipient, you need to make sure, do they have CDBG experience, and are they taking the time to learn how it's different?
yeah, and whoever said that a visit after 2 years would not be, quote, routine. I like your attitude.
Yes.
All right. And I actually want to jump, can we jump to the last question, which would be, would you have a reasonable cause to issue a finding? Or would it be a concern? Why or why not? I suppose the implied their answer is there's no problem, but we're going between finding or concern, and why or why not?
And remember those thresholds for finding versus concern, and when might the same issue flip from one to another? And while we're waiting, we had a really good question here. It said, can grantees request TA, technical assistance, from their field office? So the grantee, if they get a finding, I mean, if I assume if this is, so you've monitored the subrecipient, ouch, they have a really serious finding. Remember what I mentioned, if you have something that is at the level of finding, especially if you're looking at potentially recapturing funds, you need to be in a conversation with your field office so they're aware of it. They need to be aware of significant findings. All findings should be significant. So you should be talking to your field office, at which time they can, you know, that's one of their most important roles in supporting you. So it's a bit of a trick question, because we're technical assistance providers. We cannot provide technical assistance to subrecipients, only to grantees, and we cannot provide technical assistance in order to address a finding that HUD has made of the grantee.
But
But
I think if they talk with their field office, if you have a finding where it's truly, you know, new staff, lack of knowledge.
Yep.
At that point, I would ask your HUD field rep to say how, you know, what trainings are out there. Is there anything coming up, right? If it's environmental review, you know, ask your region specialist and say, you know, what are the best resources for that? And I mean, that's going to be up to the field office and not me, but I haven't run into a field office where they don't want you to do your job well and to get all the resources they spend time making.
Right, because they'll be helping you help your subrecipient. So and there are some ways that we as technical assistance providers can help you build your capacity for monitoring. We see that a good amount of TA going out to home PJs around monitoring housing, monitoring their affordable housing. It's very important, critical. So
yeah, and I think looking at the responses here, quite a few people say finding. Ooh, and I like whoever said that one of the findings would be because there was no action plan amendment for change of use, which is a good reminder that your action plan has to describe the types of activities you're going to be doing and beneficiaries. So I think I do agree with whoever wrote this, that even if you could have a child care center that would be allowed there, yeah, they probably don't have the documentation, but were they even set up at the beginning necessarily to allow them, even if you could flip a switch and say, no, now it is childcare. And just the fact that it's not in the CDBG agreement with the subrecipient. However, this is the kind of situation where it might be a finding, but it also doesn't have to be the end of the world necessarily. If you're able to work with the grantee and get it rectified, where maybe they do go through, put an amendment in, and start, see how many funds have been paid so far. But well, I guess this one's been a couple of years. That might be you may have a year or two that can't be rectified, but let's see.
A couple more
And I
questions.
I do agree with whoever said, it's not the subgrantee's fault because Fred didn't do his job monitoring to let them know. And that's always the push and pull with the subgrantees, isn't it? Because it is, in some ways, it is your fault if they don't know how to run their activities. So that's another reason why I say when you have a subrecipient agreement, at the very beginning, part of your monitoring with a small m is walking them through so that they know absolutely from the beginning what is in there and what the expectations are. And that way, when you monitor again, it's not the first time that they're learning what those requirements are. And
It's like I've got a couple questions.
I like this question. How does one do monitoring during a pandemic? Probably not site visits. Using remote technology is like all of our meetings and like this conference. It's more frequent now, and it can really be something that you use, pandemic or not, which is having grantees make PDF scans of their documents and send them in. And again, it depends on if the programs are being held at this time, right? If staff is in the office, you may have to have a little leniency on dates and things like that. You still want to try to work with your subgrantees so that you aren't having them pick records, but sometimes records are digital as well, right? We're getting farther and farther necessarily from having just paper records, right? So there may be reports that they can print out of their systems. Any of the, I say most of the things other than the physical visit, seeing, people or a roof and requesting digital photos, especially if it's any kind of construction project, right? You can't necessarily sub out construction, like your electric permit inspection, but so many records you can do digitally and, go back when you're able to in person, look at the records. But I think technology it's one of the ways that you can be doing more frequent monitoring and looking at records. And it looks like, Rob, you've posted some answers for the subrecipient oversight. And
Yeah, I dropped those. So in the replies there to the questions down below, you'll see the links to the guidebooks and to the CDBG CV toolkit.
And there's somebody talking about the change of use after 5 years. This is one where, everything is, it depends. It's always the legal answer, but the question is, if there's change of use and 5 years had passed for this, would a change of use request be required? And the real answer is it depends on what's in the subrecipient agreement. But if this is, it may very well be that if you don't have the clause stating when this happened in the agreement, if it's longer, you may have to talk with, they may have to talk with the grantee about change of use. And if this were, we're assuming this is a public facility, right? So
Remember, that's the minimum too.
yeah, I'm thinking that's the minimum, but yeah, it depends on what you've said for your public facilities.
Yep.
And
What you had in your agreement. So there, in the guidebooks, there's a really good what you need to have in your agreements. I believe it does have the change of use, and it should be updated now. Have the correct references, but also things like program income. So definitely take a look at that for and there's some FAQs too, the CDBG FAQs buried there in Hot Exchange.
someone answered that, like, one of the best questions were, if we had another hour. Anyway, any guidance on conveying internal within your government monitoring results for the activities, especially if it's executive directors and staff that are saying, nope, it is. This is one where, at some point it is the executive directors and the government, their responsibility. But as staff, it's important that you do document and show what you think. But yeah, this can be a very sticky topic, and sometimes it just depends also on the internal politics of who's going to convey this monitoring result. It may not, you may want to have an interdepartmental discussion of that and forward it to somebody else as well. I know that is a very delicate situation, but internal government use of CDBG is, I was going to say, not one of the most fraught things, but it can be one of the most stressful parts of your year. I know it's that kind of control. You can have control over the whole process for all kinds of subgrantees, but internally can be another matter.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah, I think in this kind of situation, the one thought would be to not be careful not to personalize it, just in even terms of the language you use. So it's not, you're not pointing out particular staff, people. But and I think too that exit and the entrance and exit conference are very important to set the tone of who you're speaking to as who's sort of responsible for this. So you don't have managers throwing people under the bus. So it's very clear that no, you are the, you are the responsible party. So yeah,
And
not easy.
And there's one question I'm not going to know the answer to. It's the question now, which is do electronic records count, or does everything need to be in paper? That's one for your field office, because I have heard many things, and I don't know if there's anybody from HUD on the HUD on the webinar that wants to jump in, but I just know I've heard different things, and of course things change every year with technology. But I know there are security and confidentiality things to consider with the digital records. But
All right. Okay, we're getting told that they're ready in track A. So if you want to head over to track A for closing remarks. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We hope you found this useful. We certainly enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
thank you, everybody.